It was a night like any other when I first stepped into the abandoned house. The air, thick with the scent of mold and decay, clung to my skin as if the house itself were trying to suffocate me. Its towering silhouette loomed against the moonlight, casting long, dark shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally over the grass. This house had a reputation, one I hadn't believed until now. What I was about to uncover wasn't just a place where people had vanished, but a house that lived and breathed fear. You've heard of haunted houses, right? Stories of ghosts, curses, and eerie happenings that could send even the most skeptical running for the hills. But some houses, some of them, are more than just haunted. They're cursed. And this one was alive. Tonight, I'll share with you the 5 most terrifying events that ever took place in this house. The ones that still send shivers down the spines of those who dare speak its name. Grab a seat and hold on tight, because these stories are more than just whispers in the dark. They're the real deal. And if you think you can stomach it, let's begin. Our story begins in 1922, a decade after the house was built by a wealthy but mysterious man named Nathaniel Blackwood. Blackwood was a collector of oddities, strange artifacts, ancient books, and relics from distant lands. His obsession with the occult led him to pour countless resources into his private collection. But somewhere along the way, his obsession took a dark turn. One cold winter evening, Blackwood invited a young family to stay at the house, a family that had fallen on hard times and needed a place to stay. The Edwards family, a mother, father, and their young daughter, were excited to have found such an opulent home to rest in. But little did they know that their arrival would be the last act of normalcy in this house for a long time. It started with strange noises in the middle of the night. At first, they thought it was the wind whistling through cracks in the walls. But then, the noises grew louder. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the halls, though no one was there. The family would wake in the night to find doors that had once been closed, wide open, as if inviting them in. But the most chilling event came on the 4th night. The Edwards family woke to find that their daughter, Lily, had disappeared from her bed. A search throughout the house turned up nothing. No sign of her, no trace. The only thing left behind was a single, small footprint in the dust, leading toward the basement. The parents, frantic, raced down the basement, but there was no sign of their child. Then, the door slammed behind them. The father, Thomas, tried to force the door open, but it was no use. It wouldn't budge. They were trapped. For hours, they screamed for help, their voices echoing in the basement's cold, dark walls. But no one came. By the time the door finally opened, the family was gone. No one ever found their bodies. And Lily? Well, some say her laughter still echoes through the house to this day, haunting the hallways, waiting for another family to make the mistake of entering the house. By the 1940s, the house had already built a reputation in the town as a place of fear. People whisper about strange happenings, lights flickering without reason, strange shadows darting past windows at night, and the sound of footsteps pacing the halls even when no one was home. But it wasn't until after Nathaniel Blackwood's untimely death that the true horror of the house began to surface. In 1935, Blackwood's body was found in the parlor, seated in front of his prized collection of ancient tomes. His face was twisted in an expression of pure terror. No one could explain how he died. It wasn't a natural cause. There was no sign of illness, no sign of injury. The cause of his death remained a mystery. It was only after his death that the first ghostly sightings began. His spirit, angry and restless, began to manifest in the most terrifying ways. There were reports from the townsfolk of seeing Blackwood's ghost walk in the halls of the house at night, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light, his body draped in a tattered black cloak that looked like it had been rotting for decades. One night, a local couple, the Horrifying, decided to spend the night in the house as part of a dare. They wanted to prove the rumors wrong. But what they didn't count on was Blackwood's rage. As the night wore on, strange things began to happen. The temperature in the house dropped to an unbearable chill, the air thick with the scent of decay. Shadows began to move on their own. But the worst was yet to come. In the middle of the night, the Horrifying were awakened by a loud bang. The door to their bedroom slammed open, and there, standing in the doorway, was the apparition of Nathaniel Blackwood. His face was a mask of rage, and his hollow eyes pierced through them like daggers. He muttered something unintelligible, his voice like a rasping whisper from the grave. The couple, paralyzed with fear, watched as the ghostly figure approached them. And then, in an instant, they vanished. The house was silent once again. When authorities arrived, they found no sign of the Harringtons. The bed was empty, the windows still locked. All that remained was the eerie sense that Blackwood's malevolent presence had consumed them, just as it had consumed his own soul. But the house's horrors didn't end with the spirits of the past. In 1961, a new resident moved in, a young woman named Clara Stevens, a historian fascinated by the occult. Clara was drawn to the house not by the tales of its haunted past, but by its vast library of arcane books and relics. She believed that there was power hidden within the house, knowledge that could make her rich and famous in academic circles. One of the items that caught her attention was a large, antique mirror that stood in the entryway of the house. The mirror had been part of Blackwood's collection, and it was rumored to have been enchanted. Some said it had once belonged to a witch who had cursed it before her death. Clara, in her ignorance and greed, dismissed these rumors. She thought it was just an old artifact, a relic of no consequence. But one night, while standing in front of the mirror, Clara saw something that changed her life forever. At first, the reflection was normal. Her own face stared back at her, pale and tired from long hours of study. But then, as she blinked, something shifted in the glass. A figure appeared behind her, a tall, thin figure dressed in black, its face obscured by shadows. Clara froze. The figure reached out, its hand brushing her shoulder in the reflection. She spun around, but no one was there. Her heart raced. She tried to turn away from a mirror, but her feet wouldn't move. It was as if the mirror had locked her in place, holding her there with an unseen force. The figure in the reflection grinned, its face twisting in unnatural ways. And then it stepped out of the mirror. Clara screamed. She fought against the force that held her in place, but it was no use. The figure reached out and touched her face, its fingers cold as ice. The next morning, Claire was found lying in front of the mirror, her body contorted in an unnatural position. Her eyes were wide open, her face frozen in terror. And the mirror? It was perfectly still, reflecting nothing but an empty room. The house still stands today, though it is now abandoned, its dark history hidden behind boarded-up windows. The townspeople avoid it, too terrified to even glance at its decaying facade. But for those who have ventured inside, the horrors never end. The house lives on, its spirits, its curses, its history, all trapped within walls that never forget. As for the 5 horrifying events that transpired there, they're only the beginning. There are whispers of others, of rituals gone wrong, of creatures lurking in the shadows, waiting to be set free. So the next time you hear the call of a haunted house, remember this. Some houses are more than just haunted. They are alive with the screams of the past, and they will never let you leave. Do you dare enter? The chilling events of the haunted house didn't stop with the terrifying apparitions of Nathaniel Blackwood or the cursed mirror. As the decades passed, the house became more than just a place where strange and supernatural events occurred. It became a focal point for those who sought to tap into forbidden knowledge. The house itself was a magnet for occultists, charlatans, and scholars of the dark arts, all of whom believed the house was a gateway to another realm, a place where ancient forces could be summoned. But none of them knew just how far the darkness had already sunk into the very bones of the house. In the early 1970s, an ambitious occultist named Henry Mallory entered the house with a group of fellow practitioners. Mallory was known for his extreme rituals and his unshakable belief that true power could only be attained by breaking the laws of nature. He had heard the rumors about the house's dark energy and was convinced that a ritual performed within its cursed walls would unlock unimaginable power. Mallory gathered a small group of trusted individuals, each equally obsessed with the idea of channeling the energies within the house. Armed with candles, incense, and an ancient tome that had been passed down through generations of occultists, they prepared for what would become the most dangerous ritual ever performed in that forsaken place. The night was thick with an oppressive silence as they set up in the grand parlor, where Blackwood had once sat in his final moments. The air was thick, heavy, and seemed to pulse with an energy that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. The candles flickered nervously in the dark, as if aware of the darkness they were about to summon. Mallory began chanting in an ancient language, his voice low and reverent, his words falling like a curse on the house. At first, nothing happened. The group waited, tense, each of them looking around nervously. But then the walls began to groan. The floor creaked beneath their feet, and a distant sound that could only be described as a low, guttural growl emanated from somewhere deep within the house. The air grew colder, so cold that they could see their breath swirling in the flickering candlelight. And then the lights went out. For a moment, all was silent. Then, all at once, the temperature dropped, and the group felt a pressure, as if the house itself were holding them down. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and distort, moving like living things, swirling around them, drawing closer, tightening their grip. That's when it happened. The walls of the house shuddered, and with a deafening crash, the chandelier above them shattered, sending glass flying in every direction. The ritual had gone terribly wrong. Mallory screamed in terror, realizing too late that he had unleashed something far worse than he could have ever imagined. A dark figure, shadowed, distorted, and featureless, emerged from the center of the room. It was as though it crawled straight from the bowels of hell itself, dripping with malice and rage. The group tried to flee, but the house seemed to reject them, its doorways twisting and shifting in impossible ways. Each exit they tried led them deeper into the house, into the hard darkness where the walls were closing in. The last thing anyone heard before the house fell silent once again were the frantic screams of Henry Mallory and his followers, begging for mercy. By morning, their bodies were found scattered throughout the house. Their faces were frozen in expressions of abject horror, their eyes wide open in disbelief. But what was most terrifying was that there were no signs of struggle, no blood, no wounds, just the unmistakable sense that their souls had been consumed. No one knows exactly what was unleashed that night, but rumors say the spirit of the house itself, something older and far darker than anyone had imagined, was awakened. And from that day on, no one dared approach the house again, for fear that the ancient entity had claimed it as its own. The last person to ever live in the house was a man named Richard Hawthorne, a reclusive writer who had heard the legends of the haunted house and seen the rumors spread in the local papers. Intrigued by the mystery, Hawthorne decided to make the house his home, convinced that the stories were nothing more than superstition and exaggeration. When he moved in, he was unaware of the house's dark history, blissfully ignorant of the spirits and entities that still roamed its halls. He was a solitary man, focusing all his time on his writing. At first, the house seemed calm. The eerie whispers and cold draft that others had spoken of didn't seem to affect him. He laughed off the odd noises, the way doors would creak open on their own, or the occasional shadow that passed by the corner of his eye. But as the weeks turned into months, something began to change in Richard. He started to hear whispers in the night, soft, unintelligible voices that seemed to call his name. At first, he tried to ignore them, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they filled his every waking moment. Richard became obsessed with the house's history. He began to study everything he could find about it, poring over old newspapers, town records, and journals. As he delved deeper into the past, he uncovered the truth about Nathaniel Blackwood, the cursed mirror, the rituals, and the terrible events that had taken place within the walls. But his obsession with the house grew darker. He began to write in fevered bursts, his once peaceful demeanor replaced by an intense, almost manic energy. Those who knew him said he stopped sleeping. His eyes grew hollow and his skin grew pale. And then one night, Richard Hawthorne disappeared. No one saw him leave. The house was eerily quiet, but his possessions were left behind. The half-finished manuscript, the papers scattered across the floor, the open journal. The authorities searched the house from top to bottom, but there was no sign of Richard, no trace of him anywhere. The only thing that remained was a single page torn from his journal. On it was written a chilling message. I have seen the true face of the house. It is not a house of the living, nor is it a house of the dead. It is the gate to something far worse. And now it knows me. It knows my name. I have become its final tenant, forever trapped within its walls. To this day, the house stands abandoned, untouched, waiting for the next curious soul to wander in. But those who remember Richard Hawthorne and his final warning believe the house is still hungry, waiting for someone new to fall into its grasp, to become its latest victim. And some say that if you listen closely, you can hear his faint, desperate whispers calling from inside. The house, with its dark past and twisted history, continues to linger in the collective nightmares of the town. People still talk about it, but only in hushed tones, as if speaking its name aloud might summon the horrors that still reside within. Some believe that the house was never meant to be a home, but a vessel, a trap for souls, for those who dare to seek its forbidden power. So, if you ever find yourself passing through that town, and your eyes fall upon the old house in the distance, remember these stories. The Vanishing Family, the Ghost of Nathaniel Blackwood, the Cursed Mirror, the Dark Ritual, the Final Tenant. And if you ever feel a chill creeping up your spine, if you hear whispers in the wind or see shadows flickering in the corner of your eye, you might just find that the house is waiting for you, too. Do you dare enter, knowing the price you might pay? The house will never forget. Even though the house remained abandoned for years after the disappearance of Richard Hawthorne, whispers about its malevolent nature didn't fade. If anything, the rumors grew darker. As the decades passed, the house seemed to evolve, its presence, its curse, twisting into something far more insidious than anyone could have ever imagined. But no one truly understood the full extent of what lay within the house's walls, not until an unexpected event began to draw attention to it once again. It started with a local historian named Dr. Abigail Graves, who had spent her life researching paranormal activity. Dr. Graves had always dismissed the popular tales of the house as exaggerated, despite the undeniable tragedies that had occurred there. Her skepticism, however, was soon put to the test when she received an old, leather-bound journal from an anonymous source. It was the personal journal of Nathaniel Blackwood. The journal chronicled Blackwood's obsession with dark magic and his eventual descent into madness, but there was one entry that stood out above all others, an entry that gave Dr. Graves pause. In it, Blackwood detailed a ritual so dangerous, so unimaginable, that even he seemed to question his involvement. It wasn't just about summoning spirits or communing with the dead. It was about creating a permanent doorway between this world and another, far more horrifying one. A doorway that could never be closed. According to Blackwood's writing, the house itself was not simply built atop a cursed piece of land. No, it was crafted as a physical and spiritual anchor. Blackwood had used his fortune to construct the house as a containment vessel for the dark entities he had conjured, entities from realms beyond comprehension, whose true forms could never be seen by human eyes. The house wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. It was a prison, a gateway. The deeper Dr. Graves delved into the journal, the more she began to unravel the terrifying truth. The house didn't just trap the souls of the dead. It consumed them, and once it had a soul, it kept it forever tethered to the house. The energy the house harvested made it stronger, more intelligent, more powerful over time. But most terrifying of all, Blackwood's last entry seemed to indicate that the house was growing sentient, that it could think, feel, and, most disturbingly, wait. The more Dr. Graves studied the journal, the more she began to feel the pull of the house itself. She couldn't shake the sense that she was being watched, that the house knew she was getting too close to its secrets. Every step she took to uncover the truth seemed to lead her back to the house itself, as it were a living organism, leading her down a dark path from which there was no escape. Finally, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread, she decided to confront the house head-on, convinced that the only way to truly understand its power was to enter it, to stand within its walls and face whatever lay inside. What she didn't realize, however, was that the house was ready for her. Dr. Graves' arrival at the house was met with a palpable sense of foreboding. The air seemed heavier, as if the house itself were breathing, waiting for her. It had been nearly 30 years since anyone had dared to enter, but the stories had never stopped. It seemed as though the house had only grown stronger with time, its hunger for souls more insatiable than ever before. As Dr. Graves crossed the threshold, the temperature plummeted. The once pristine entryway was now decaying, its walls covered in layers of dust and grime, the faintest trace of ancient bloodstains visible on the floor. A strange hum reverberated through the air, the kind of hum you feel in your bones but can't hear with your ears. The house seemed alive, as though it were aware of her presence, and it was watching her, waiting. But Dr. Graves was not deterred. She walked deeper into the house, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as she passed the decaying furniture, the shattered windows, and the crumbling walls. It was as if time had stopped here, leaving the house frozen in a moment of horror. As she ventured further into the heart of the house, she began to experience something strange. Her mind started to fracture. She saw fleeting glimpses of figures moving in the shadows, just out of sight, too quick to fully identify, but too clear to ignore. The whispers from the walls grew louder, surrounding her, speaking in voices she couldn't understand. And that hum, it was now a constant, like the beat of a drum that never stopped, reminding her of the house's presence, of its terrible power. The further Dr. Graves went, the more disoriented she became. She had come to the house to uncover its secrets, to expose the truth behind the haunting. But what she found was far beyond what she had ever imagined. In the deepest part of the house, she found a library, Blackwood's library, filled with ancient tomes and occult books that she had only read about in her studies. Among the rows of forgotten knowledge, one book stood out, its cover bound in tattered, rotting leather, its title embossed in gold that had long since worn away. As she opened the book, the house seemed to groan around her, the air thickening with malevolent energy. She flipped through the pages, her heart pounding in her chest. The words were written in a language she couldn't read, but the symbols and drawings, diagrams of twisted shapes and dark rituals, made her stomach churn. Suddenly, she heard a voice behind her. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was soft, low, and eerily calm, but it chilled her to her core. She spun around, her flashlight trembling in her hand, but there was no one there, only the shadows that seemed to grow, swirling and shifting as if they had minds of their own. The floor beneath her feet began to shake, and the house seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, like a heartbeat. Then the floor cracked open. A dark, swirling vortex appeared, stretching down into an abyss of endless blackness. Someone reached out from the depths of the hole. A skeletal hand, long and twisted, clawed its way up, followed by another, then a whole body, its form hunched and grotesque, as though it had been trapped in the darkness for centuries. Its eyes glowed an unnatural green, its mouth twisted into a grin that made Dr. Graves' blood run cold. It was then that she realized the terrible truth. The house didn't just trap souls. It fed on them, pulling them into its depths and using their essence to grow stronger. The very house was a creature, an entity that had existed long before Blackwood's time, and one that would continue to exist long after. Dr. Graves turned to flee, but the shadows swallowed her whole. The house had claimed yet another victim. And so, the legend of the house lives on, its horrors growing with each passing year. The town around it has long been abandoned, its inhabitants fleeing in terror at the thought of what still lingers inside. The house, once a place of wealth and prestige, is now a cursed prison, trapping the souls of all who enter and feeding on their fear. If you ever find yourself in the area, and if you dare look at that house in the corner of your eye, you may think you see something or someone standing in the window, watching you. It is said that the house is always looking for its next tenant, its next victim. The house is not just haunted. It is alive, waiting, watching, feeding. Do you dare to enter? Be careful, because the house knows when you're near. And when you least expect it, it will call to you, pulling you into its depths, forever trapped in its dark embrace. Remember, it's not just the past that haunts this house. It's the future, too. And one day, it might just be your name that the house is whispering in the dark. Years passed after Dr. Abigail Graves' disappearance, but the house's reputation continued to grow, morphing from mere legend to something far more terrifying. The whispers of its cursed nature spread far beyond the town's borders, to neighboring towns and cities. It became a place that dared people to challenge the unknown, a place where many adventurers, thrill seekers, and paranormal investigators made their way, only to vanish or return with shattered minds. And yet, despite the horror that awaited, there was always someone willing to test the limits. The latest to arrive was a group of investigative YouTubers, infamous for their spine-chilling explorations of haunted places. They called themselves the Night Seekers. Known for their bravery and their disregard for danger, They were eager to explore the haunted house, confident that they would survive the night with nothing more than creepy footage and eerie sounds to show for it. The group, led by the charismatic Adrian Westbrook, had made a name for themselves in the paranormal world. They were experts at provoking spirits, getting action for their subscribers, and somehow managing to stay alive in the most dangerous environments. But the moment they arrived at the house, they felt something different, something more profound. The usual paranormal signs they'd experienced at other locations, a drop in temperature, strange noises, fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures, were all present, yes. But there was something else. The air was thick, dense, pressing against their skin. The house seemed to hum with a rhythm that echoed deep inside their bones. As they stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the front door, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't just a haunted structure. It was alive, aware of their presence. They set up their cameras at the entrance, capturing the dilapidated grandeur of the house, its grand facade cloaked in darkness. The windows were black like soulless eyes, and the front door hung ajar, as if inviting them in. But as Adrian approached the door, a cold gust of wind slammed it shut. "Not a good start," Adrian joked nervously. "I think it's telling us we're not welcome." But his comment fell flat. The group was unnerved, their usual bravado faltering for the first time. Still, they pushed forward, determined to document what awaited inside. As they entered, the heavy door creaked and groaned, almost as though the house were stretching its limbs after years of dormancy. The air was so still that even the faintest sound felt like a thunderclap. The crew had set up their cameras in the main hall, the same space where so many had disappeared, where Blackwood had spent his final days, the same space that had consumed so many souls. Adrian's voice quivered slightly as he addressed camera. "Tonight, we're here to find the truth behind the stories, to uncover what's hidden in the walls of this haunted house. We're not here to run. We're here to face whatever's waiting for us." As the team moved deeper into the house, the temperature dropped drastically. Their breath condensed into visible puffs of mist, swirling in the air. The walls seemed to pulse, almost alive, as if the house itself was watching them. And then came the first whisper, a sound so faint that they almost missed it. It wasn't a voice, at least not one that belonged to any human. It was a hum, like a slow, steady vibration, rising in pitch until it became something akin to a low growl. Adrian paused, holding up a finger to his lips. The others stopped in their tracks. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Before anyone could respond, the growl deepened, almost turning into a word. "Go." The word was clear now, unmistakable. The voice sounded as if it came from the very walls, seeping into their minds, chilling them to the core. Adrian's face drained of color. The group exchanged nervous glances. "No," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "We can't leave now. We need to know, for the viewers, for the truth." But the house wasn't done yet. The shadows began to move, stretching unnaturally long across the floor. They seemed to form shapes, darting around the team's feet, creating paths that led them deeper into the house. The air grew dense, almost suffocating, and the hum grew louder. The walls began to vibrate with a low thrum, as if something was trying to break through. Then came the mirrors. They entered a room that seemed to have once been a library. The shelves were mostly empty, the books rotting and decayed, but there were 3 large mirrors hanging on the wall, their surfaces cloudy with age. But as the crew set up their cameras in front of them, something strange happened. Their reflections didn't match their movements. The figures in the mirrors were slower, twisted, as if they had a life of their own. And then, the mirror in the center of the room began to crack. A sudden cold rush of wind swept through the room, extinguishing their flashlights. The mirrors, one by one, shattered, sending fragments of glass cascading onto the floor. But it was what happened next that would change everything. From the cracks in the mirrors, dark, shadowy figures emerged. They weren't fully formed, but they moved with purpose, twisting their way through the cracks, reaching toward the team. Adrian screamed into the camera, "We have to get out of here." But the house wouldn't let them go. The door they had entered through slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. The shadows in the mirrors had come alive, and they weren't just reflections. They were the souls of the house, the lingering remnants of those who had been trapped here, just like the group had now become. As the dark figures advanced, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A low, guttural growl echoed from deep within the house. The walls cracked and the floor buckled. The very foundation of the house seemed to be coming alive, as if the house itself were responding to their presence, to their fear. The last shot from Adrian's camera showed him backing away, his eyes wide with terror as the shadows closed in. The last thing he managed to say was, "It's too late. The house, it knows us." The feed cut out. When the authorities arrived hours later, they found the house eerily silent. The front door was wide open, but the house was empty. No signs of the night seekers remained. No bodies. No cameras. Just the same dark, oppressive silence. But as they entered, they felt it. Something was there, watching them, waiting. They could almost hear the whispers, faint and distant, seeping from the walls, beckoning them further in. As they made their way through the house, one of the officers noticed something strange. A name had been scratched into the wall. Adrian's name. The house had taken another group of souls, just as it had done with so many before. And as they left, a chilling realization set in. The house was never finished. It wasn't just a haunted building. It was a living, breathing entity. An entity that fed off fear, off the souls that entered, and that grew stronger with every victim. The more people that entered, the more powerful it became. Some say that the house has grown tired of waiting. Some say it is already preparing for its next move. And some believe in the deepest shadows of the house, that the whispers are still calling, still waiting for the next soul to enter its grasp. Who will be the next to face the horrors of the house? It could be you. Weeks had passed since the disappearance of Adrian and his crew, and yet the house still stood, looming over the forsaken town. The locals, those few who had remained, dared not speak of it. In hushed tones, they whispered of its terrible power and the curse that had haunted the land for centuries. The house had consumed so many souls, but no one could say for sure why it continued to exist or what fed its insatiable hunger. What was known, however, was that the house had changed. After the night seekers vanished, strange events began to occur around the town. Dogs howled at the edges of the woods, eyes glistening with fear, and children who once played near the house at dusk began to have nightmares. Nightmares filled with whispers and faces contorted in agony. It wasn't long before the tremors began. The first sign that something was stirring within the walls of the old mansion. And then one night it happened. The house's windows, once black with neglect, seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. The air in the town shifted, as if the very ground were holding its breath. People who had once dared to drive past it now avoided the road altogether. It was as if the house was drawing power from the outside world, drawing closer to some unknown climax. But there was one man who could not ignore the call, the one person who would be drawn back into the house's terrifying embrace. Ethan Crawford was a former investigative journalist who had once been fascinated by the paranormal. After covering countless ghost stories and hauntings, Ethan had almost given up on the supernatural altogether. But when he heard about the disappearances of Adrian and his crew, his curiosity was reignited. He knew there was something about this house, something that defied every logical explanation. But more than that, he felt an overwhelming need to uncover its truth. His decision was made on a cold, windless night as he sat alone in his office, staring at the photos of the night seekers. Adrian's face stood out to him. The look of fear in the man's eyes, something Ethan could relate to on a deeper, unspoken level. It was the same look of unease Ethan had seen in so many others who had ventured into the unknown. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Ethan rented a car and made his way toward the town. He didn't tell anyone about his plans. The pull of the house was too great. He arrived at the edge of the town just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a dull orange light over the landscape. The house stood at the top of the hill, like a black monolith against the backdrop of the fading day. As Ethan approached, he saw the glow emanating from the windows once again. It was no ordinary light, but a sickly greenish hue, like a warning from beyond. He parked his car at the base of the hill and made his way on foot toward the house, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The ground felt uneven under his feet, as though it was shifting beneath him, reluctant to let him ascend. At the entrance, the door stood slightly ajar, as though it had been waiting for him. It swung open with a creak that seemed to reverberate through the empty air. Once inside, the oppressive stillness gripped him. It was as though the house had grown used to the passage of time, its very structure wrapped in decay. Yet there was something new. A palpable sense of energy lingered in the air, something unnatural, waiting to be unleashed. The walls seemed to pulse with each breath he took. As Ethan ventured deeper into the house, it became clear something inside was awake. He heard the familiar hum, that low, resonating vibration that made the walls vibrate like a tuning fork. But now it was different. It was accompanied by voices, soft at first, whispers just out of reach of understanding, until one word became clear. Feed! Ethan froze, his heart raced in his chest, but he could not turn back. He had come too far, and the need to know the truth was overpowering. He moved forward, following the eerie sound of whispers. The house seemed to breathe, its walls shifting as he passed. The familiar cold draft swept through the hallways, but they felt alive, like hands trailing just behind him. His flashlight flickered as he stepped into what seemed to be the heart of the house, a grand, decaying ballroom. The floorboards creaked with every step, and the walls were adorned with faded, tarnished mirrors. And then the reflections, just as they had done before, twisted. In the mirrors, Ethan saw himself, but he wasn't alone. Shadowy figures stood around him, barely visible but unmistakably present. They crowded the mirrors, their twisted forms beckoning to him with outstretched hands. Some had faces. Some were nothing but voids, but each of them stared at him with a longing that chilled him to the bone. He spun around, but there was no one behind him. The house began to groan, louder now, as if the very foundation was protesting his presence. The floor beneath him trembled, and the lights in the mirrors flickered. In the farthest corner of the room, a door that had once been closed swung open. A figure stood in the doorway. It was a man, a tall figure, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his face obscured by shadows. The figure slowly stepped forward into the dim light. "Who are you?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it tilted its head, as if regarding him with some form of deep, unsettling understanding. Finally, the figure spoke, its voice like a crackling whisper in the dark. "I am what the house has become, what it has always been." Ethan's blood ran cold. He recognized the voice. It was the same voice that had whispered to Adrian, the same voice that had called out to countless others. The figure stepped closer, and the air grew heavier, more oppressive. With each step, the temperature dropped, his breath visible in front of him. "The house is alive," the figure continued. "It feeds on fear, on those who seek to understand. And now, it's seeking you, Ethan Crawford." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. "It's seeking me?" He stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest. He had come to uncover the truth, to expose the house's secrets. But now he realized he was part of the story. The figure in the doorway smiled, a twisted grin that spread across its face like a wound opening. "You should have stayed away," it hissed. The ground beneath Ethan's feet cracked open, and from the darkness below, the whispers grew louder. The walls began to move, shifting like the belly of a beast awakening from its slumber. The room began to spiral, the mirrors contorting as they distorted the very fabric of reality itself. And then the darkness claimed him. The feed from Ethan's camera cut out. No one ever saw Ethan Crawford again. His disappearance, like those of all the others, would remain an unsolved mystery. The house, however, stood waiting, watching, as it always had. In the years that followed, the house continued to lure those brave or foolish enough to seek the truth. Each person who entered seemed to add a new layer of horror, a new scream to the house's twisted history. The house was no longer a place of the past. It had become a living, breathing entity, its hunger unquenchable. Those who dared to approach it, those who ventured near, would find their names etched in the walls, their stories becoming part of the eternal cycle. The house fed on the living and the dead alike, and with every new victim, it grew stronger. And so, the house waits, its walls whispering for the next soul to claim. Will you be the next to hear the call? Or will you, like so many others, disappear into its dark embrace, leaving nothing but a story for the next group to uncover? Be careful, because the house knows when you're near, and when you least expect it, it will find you. You've been warned.